The 1-year-old millionaire's baby spat at all the nannies, but kissed the poor housekeeper. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The December afternoon in Georgetown descended slowly and heavily upon the colonial house, where the air conditioning struggled against the humid heat seeping through the century-old windows. In the living room, decorated with inherited mahogany furniture from 3 generations and a state-of-the-art television that contrasted with the historic environment, Clara Johnson paced back and forth, her cell phone glued to her ear, her tense voice echoing off the stone walls. "No, Dr. Henry, the last one lasted only 2 days. Michael won't stop crying when she approaches," Clara said, nervously adjusting her designer black blazer while watching the garden of bromeliads that her mother-in-law insisted on maintaining. "I'm starting to think there's something wrong with my son." On the other end of the line, the pediatrician tried to reassure her with technical explanations about child adaptation, but Clara knew that Michael's behavior went beyond the normal. At 38 years old, a graduate of Georgetown University with a specialization in criminal law, she had built a solid career defending complex cases in the courts of Washington, D.C. Her analytical mind, trained to unravel legal mysteries, could not comprehend why her own son rejected all caregivers with an aggression that frightened her. "Clara, you need to calm down," said David, entering the room with Michael in his arms. The 1.5-year-old boy, with golden curls and restless green eyes, squirmed, trying to escape his father's embrace. David Johnson, at 42 years old, had the elegant bearing of someone who spent his life among books and university classrooms. A professor of American literature and an award-winning writer, he carried the sensitivity of someone who observes the world with poetic eyes. But at that moment, his expression revealed the fatigue of sleepless nights. "Calm down." Clara abruptly hung up the phone. "David, this is the 5th nanny in 3 weeks. Michael screams as if he's seeing a monster every time one of them tries to pick him up. Yesterday he pushed Sarah down the stairs. She barely avoided serious injury." Michael began to whimper, stretching his little arms toward a stuffed doll on the sofa. His small fists clenched and opened nervously, a tic he had developed in recent weeks. The boy had lost weight. His once chubby cheeks now appeared more angular, and the dark circles under his green eyes betrayed the nights of interrupted sleep. "Maybe we need a different approach," suggested David, trying to soothe his son with gentle rocking. "Remember Teresa, the housekeeper that Mrs. Smith recommended? She has experience with children. She raised her nieces and nephews." "A housekeeper, David?" "Seriously." Clara stopped pacing and glared at him. "Our son needs a qualified professional, not someone who..." "Who what, Clara?" David's voice took on a firmer tone. "Who doesn't have a college degree? Who came from the countryside? You're starting to sound like your mother." The comment hit Clara like a slap. She took pride in her humble origins, the daughter of a seamstress from a working-class neighborhood who had fought to provide her daughter with an education. But the pressure to maintain appearances in high society sometimes made her forget her own roots. Michael intensified his crying, and this time, even his father's arms couldn't console him. His screams echoed through the 3-story house, mingling with the noise of cars on the street and the distant sound of the sea. The boy arched his back, rejecting any attempt at affection, as if an invisible force prevented him from accepting comfort. "All right," Clara sighed, running her hands through her perfectly styled brown hair. "Let's try Teresa. But if it doesn't work, we'll look for a specialized clinic. I can't bear to see my son like this anymore." At that moment, Jorge, the family's driver for 15 years, appeared at the door of the living room. A 60-year-old man, sun-kissed skin, always impeccable in his navy blue uniform. Jorge knew the Johnsons better than many relatives. He had witnessed Michael's birth, the sleepless nights of despair during the first months, and now saw the family disintegrating due to the child's inexplicable behavior. "Excuse me, Dr. David," said Jorge, removing his cap to reveal graying hair. "Miss Teresa has arrived. She's waiting downstairs." Clara and David exchanged glances. "Michael, as if sensing a change in the air, stopped crying for a few seconds, his curious eyes fixating on the direction of the stairs. "Send her up," said Clara, smoothing her skirt and assuming her professional posture. "Let's resolve this once and for all." Teresa ascended the marble steps with firm yet respectful strides. At 50 years old, she carried the dignity of someone who faced life without losing her sweetness. Her dark skin marked by time and the sun from a rural area, greying hair pulled back in a discreet bun, wearing a navy blue skirt and a plain but impeccable white blouse. Her hands, calloused from work, bore simple silver rings and a beaded bracelet that had belonged to her great-grandmother. "Good afternoon," she said, stopping at the entrance of the room. Her voice had the smooth cadence of the countryside, but was firm. "I'm Teresa Johnson. I came for the housekeeper position, but I heard you need help with the boy." Clara was ready to start the usual interrogation. References, experience, availability, when something extraordinary happened. Michael, who had spent weeks rejecting any approach from strangers, looked at Teresa and smiled. It wasn't just any smile, but the first genuine smile his parents had seen in weeks. His green eyes sparkled, his fists relaxed, and he reached out his arms toward Teresa with a babbled ah that sounded almost like a call. "May I?" Teresa asked, approaching slowly. Clara, dumbfounded, simply nodded. Teresa extended her arms, and Michael practically leaped from David's lap to hers. Adaptações. Miguel. Michael. São Félix. Springfield, erva cidreira, chamomile tea. Joachim. Jack. Clara nestled her face against the woman's chest, sighing, as if she had finally found what she was searching for. The silence in the room was deafening. Jorge smiled discreetly at the door. David stood frozen in surprise, and Clara felt something twist in her stomach, a mix of relief and a strange pang she couldn't identify. "How did you do that?" Clara whispered. Teresa simply smiled, gently rocking Michael. "Sometimes children know things that we adults forget to feel, Doctor." He was just waiting for someone who spoke the language of the heart. And in that moment, as Michael closed his eyes for the first time in weeks, nestled in the arms of a woman he had just met, the Johnson household began to undergo a transformation none of them could have imagined. Night fell over Washington, D.C., with its cloak of stars and the distant sound of drums echoing from the nearby streets. In their working-class neighborhood for the first time in weeks, Michael slept soundly in his crib, while Teresa quietly organized the kitchen after dinner. Her skilled hands washed the dishes with precise movements, but her mind wandered through memories of a rural area where she had learned that caring for children went far beyond what books taught. Clara observed discreetly from the kitchen door, still trying to process what she had witnessed. Teresa was not like the other housekeepers who had worked in the home. There was something in the way she moved, as if each gesture carried ancestral wisdom. When she put Michael to sleep, Teresa had hummed a soft melody that Clara did not recognize, but it seemed to hypnotize not only the child, but the house itself. "Teresa!" Clara approached, trying to maintain the professional tone she used in the office. "I need to know more about your experience. Do you have references from other families?" Teresa dried her hands on the embroidered dish towel and turned to face Clara. Her brown eyes, deep as water wells, reflected a serenity that contrasted with her employer's agitation. "Dr. Clara, I have spent my whole life caring for others. My great-grandmother, Grandma Delilla, was a midwife and healer back in Springfield. She taught me that small children feel much more than we imagine." Teresa paused, carefully choosing her words. "Michael is not a difficult child. He's just too sensitive for this noisy world." "Sensitive how?" Clara crossed her arms, her legal mind demanding concrete details. "He hears everything, Doctor." The noise of the air conditioning, the sound of cars outside, raised voices. For a child like him, it all becomes a terrible confusion in his little head. Teresa moved closer to the window that overlooked the garden. "My great-grandmother said that some children are born with the gift of sensing people's energies. Michael rejected others because they brought haste and anxiety." Clara frowned. Energies? Teresa, I am a very rational person. I don't believe in... You don't have to believe, Doctor, Teresa gently interrupted her. You just need to observe. When you came home from work in a rush, stressed about the cases, Michael cried more. When David was worried about university articles, the boy couldn't nurse properly. Teresa's words hit Clara like revelations. It was true. She had noticed that Michael became more agitated on days of difficult hearings when she came home with adrenaline still coursing through her veins. But she had always attributed it to coincidences. And what do you suggest? Clara asked, her resistance beginning to wane. First, the house needs more natural silence. All those electronic devices create a hum that only children can hear. Teresa gestured gently. Second, Michael needs routine, but a routine of affection, not of schedules. And third, she hesitated. Speak, Clara insisted. The boy senses that the family is tense. A child is like a delicate plant. If the environment is not harmonious, it wilts. Upstairs, David was working in his office, surrounded by piles of books and papers scattered across the mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather. The yellowed light from the bronze lamp illuminated his tired face as he tried to focus on grading papers, but his thoughts kept returning to the scene from the afternoon. As a writer, David had spent his life observing human behavior, creating complex characters in his novels. But nothing had prepared him for real fatherhood, for the feeling of inadequacy that consumed him whenever Michael rejected his affection. Seeing him surrender so easily in Teresa's arms awakened a mix of relief and a strange melancholy. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he said, and Teresa appeared in the doorway carrying a steaming cup. "I brought chamomile tea, Dr. David. It helps to relax after a long day." She placed the cup on the table, avoiding disturbing the organized papers. "Thank you, Teresa." David took a sip and felt the gentle flavor of the herb, which brought back memories of childhood on his grandfather's farm. "Can I ask a question? How did you know exactly what Michael needed?" Teresa sat in the chair across from the table after receiving a nod of permission from David. "Doctor, I lost a child many years ago." Her voice maintained its serenity, but David sensed the old pain she carried. "Jack was the same age as Michael when God took him. After that, I cared for many children, nieces, neighbors' kids, my employer's grandchildren. I learned that each one has its own language. I'm so sorry for your loss," David said, genuinely moved. "It was 20 years ago, Doctor. The pain never completely goes away, but we learn to transform it into love for others." Teresa looked at the pictures of Michael scattered across the shelf. "Your boy is not difficult. He just needs someone who understands his sensitivity." "Sometimes I feel like a failure as a father," David confessed, surprising himself with his own honesty. "Michael never seems comfortable with me. Do you want some advice?" Teresa leaned slightly forward. "Children don't need a perfect father. They need a present father. The doctor worries too much about doing everything right and forgets to simply be there." That same night, in the couple's bedroom, Clara brushed her hair in front of the Victorian vanity mirror, watching David in the reflection. He was lying on the king-size bed, still wearing his dress shirt, staring at the ornate ceiling. "You talked to her," Clara said, not as a question, but as a statement. "We talked," David confirmed. "Clara, I think we underestimated Teresa. She has an intuition about Michael that we, the parents, don't have." Clara turned abruptly, her green eyes shining with a mix of anger and insecurity. "Is that what you're trying to say?" "That's not it, love." David sat up on the bed. "It's that maybe we're complicating things too much. Teresa sees Michael as a child who needs affection, not as a problem to be solved." Clara walked to the window overlooking the garden, where LED lights discreetly illuminated the bromeliads and orchids that Mrs. Johnson, David's mother, insisted on cultivating. The garden was a mix of tradition and modernity. Native plants coexisted with exotic species, just like the house itself, where colonial furniture shared space with state-of-the-art appliances. "David, I worked hard to get where I am," Clara said, her voice low but firm. "I came from a family that barely had enough to eat. I studied in public school. I struggled to pass the entrance exam. I built this life to give the best for our child. And now you want me to accept that a housekeeper understands Michael better than I do? It's not about understanding better or worse. David approached his wife. It's about understanding differently. Teresa has an experience that we don't have. What experience? She told me about medicinal plants, energies, blessings. David, we are educated, rational people. We can't base our child's upbringing on superstitions. And what if they aren't superstitions? David gently touched Clara's shoulder. What if it's just a different way of seeing the world? Michael responded to her in a way he never responded to anyone. Clara pulled away from her husband's touch. I need to process all of this. It was a very intense day. In the kitchen, Teresa was finishing her last tasks before retreating to the small room at the back of the house that George had prepared for her. She was grinding dried herbs she had brought from a small town, chamomile, fennel, lemongrass, creating a mixture that would help Michael have more peaceful nights. George appeared in the kitchen already out of uniform, wearing a simple polo shirt and shorts. So, Teresa, was the first day heavy? He asked, pouring himself a glass of water from the fridge. Not heavy, George. Just intense, Teresa smiled. This boy has so much love stored inside him. He was just waiting for someone who knew how to bring it out. The family is good people, George said, sitting at the kitchen table. But they've been a bit lost lately. Dr. David is too sensitive for his own good, and Dr. Clara, well, she carries the weight of the world on her shoulders. And Mrs. Johnson. Teresa asked about David's grandmother, whom she had not yet met. George grimaced. She's a die-hard traditionalist. She'll test you, you can be sure of that. But deep down, she has a good heart. Teresa stored the herbs in labeled glass jars. George, can I ask you a question? Why was Michael rejecting all the caregivers? George thought for a moment. You know, Teresa, since he was born, the house has changed. It used to be quieter, more harmonious. Then came the pressure of motherhood. Dr. David with problems at the university, Dr. Clara spending more and more time at the office. He paused. Children sense these things, right? They do, Teresa agreed. And Michael is especially sensitive. Tomorrow I'll start working slowly with him, creating a routine that calms not just the boy, but the whole house. As the house gradually fell asleep, Teresa knelt beside her simple bed and offered a silent prayer, thanking for another opportunity to care for a child and asking for wisdom to help not just Michael, but the entire Johnson family find their lost balance. Outside, Washington, D.C. breathed its nighttime rhythm, and in the house in Georgetown, for the first time in weeks, everyone slept soundly. The morning sun filtered through the white linen curtains in Michael's room, creating a soft play of light and shadow on the light blue walls. Teresa had arrived early, at 6 in the morning, and had already been watching the boy sleep for 15 minutes. His small hands were relaxed, his face serene, a completely different image from the restless child she had known the day before. When Michael opened his eyes and saw Teresa sitting in the rocking chair next to the crib, he didn't cry or get startled. He simply stretched his little arms, making a soft sound that seemed to say, "Finally, you're here." Teresa picked him up slowly and carefully, feeling the warm weight of the child against her chest. "Good morning, my angel," she whispered, her voice softer than a murmur. "Today, we will discover what you really need." Clara had woken up at 5:30, as she always did on important hearing days. She was dressed in her designer black suit, her hair neatly tied in a bun, when she heard soft sounds coming from Michael's room. She approached the slightly open door and saw Teresa feeding her son, but it wasn't an ordinary bottle. The woman had warmed the milk to the exact temperature, testing it on her wrist, and was feeding Michael at a slow pace, whispering a lullaby that Clara didn't know. "Teresa!" Clara entered the room, her voice inevitably louder than the caregivers. Michael immediately startled at the sound, arching his back and beginning to whimper. Teresa made a subtle gesture with her free hand, asking for silence, and continued feeding him until he calmed down again. "Dr. Clara, Michael has very sensitive hearing," Teresa explained in a low voice, even after Michael finished his bottle. "Loud noises, even a normal voice, sound like shouting to him. Clara felt as if she had received a punch to the stomach. "Are you saying that I shout at my child?" "No, doctor. I'm saying that for him our normal voice is already too loud. Notice, when you speak more softly, he calms down. When someone speaks loudly or there's noise, he gets agitated." To demonstrate, Teresa conducted a test. She spoke in a normal tone. "Michael, look here." The boy immediately frowned and began to squirm restlessly. Then she whispered, "Michael, my love, look at Teresa." The boy turned his little face in her direction, his curious and calm green eyes. Clara watched, fascinated and embarrassed at the same time. How many times had she come home speaking loudly on the phone, discussing cases with David, giving instructions to the housekeepers? For Michael, each of those situations must have been torture. "Why didn't any pediatrician detect this?" Clara asked, her voice now consciously lower. "Because in the offices, doctor, the doctors talk little with the children, and when they do, Michael was probably crying so much that they attributed it to other causes." Teresa settled Michael in her lap so he could see the garden through the window. "My great-grandmother used to say that some children are born with heightened senses. It's a gift, but it's also a challenge." David appeared in the doorway, already dressed in jeans and a polo shirt for his morning classes at Georgetown University. He had a cup of coffee and some sheets of paper in his hands, probably texts to review. "How's our little one?" he asked, approaching with soft steps. "Dr. David," Teresa gently interrupted him, "the coffee. Michael is sensitive to the strong smell, and caffeine makes sensitive children more agitated." David stopped midway, looking at the cup as if it were an alien object. "Seriously? But I drink coffee around him every day. And have you noticed that he gets more fussy in the mornings?" Teresa directed the question to Clara. Clara and David exchanged glances. It was true. Mornings were always the most difficult times with Michael, but they attributed it to being in a hurry to leave for work. "Teresa," Clara said, sitting in the rocking chair by the window, "if you could reorganize Michael's routine, what would you do?" Teresa thought for a moment, watching the boy play with his own fingers in her lap. "First, I would create moments of natural silence. No television, loud music, or ringing phones when he is awake. Second, I would change the meal times. He needs to eat in a calm environment without rush. Third—" She hesitated. "Go on," encouraged David. "His room needs some adjustments. That air conditioning makes a noise that only he can hear. And the very stimulating colors make sensitive children agitated." Clara looked around Michael's room. It had cost a fortune to decorate. Wallpaper with colorful animal designs, a musical mobile with little animals that spun and played melodies, a series of electronic toys that blinked and made sounds. To her, it was a dream room. For Michael, Teresa was suggesting, it was a sensory torture chamber. "Can you make these changes?" Clara asked. "I can, but it will be a gradual process. Too rapid a change could also scare him." At that moment, George knocked discreetly on the door. "Excuse me, Dr. Clara, Mrs. Johnson is arriving." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Clara quickly stood up, smoothing her suit. David sighed softly. Even Michael seemed to sense the tension, squirming restlessly in Teresa's lap. Mrs. Johnson was a 72-year-old woman who carried the elegance of the local aristocracy in her posture. A widow of a judge, she had raised David alone after he lost his parents in a car accident. With impeccably styled white hair, always dressed in linen or silk sets, and wearing discreet but expensive jewelry, she commanded the family with an iron fist disguised as a kid glove. "Good morning, dears," she said, entering the room with firm steps, her voice naturally loud and authoritative. "I came to meet the new housekeeper." Michael immediately began to cry at the sound of Mrs. Johnson's voice. Teresa calmly stood up, gently rocking him and whispering a melody in his ear that sounded like an African lullaby. "Grandma, you need to speak more softly," David requested. "Michael has sensitive hearing." Mrs. Johnson raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Sensitive hearing? David, a child is not crystal. They can't be spoiled like this." "It's not spoiling, Mrs. Johnson." Teresa spoke up for the first time, her voice respectful but firm. "It's a neurological characteristic. Some children are born this way. And how do you know that? Mrs. Johnson turned to Teresa, evaluating her from head to toe. Did you study medicine? Child psychology? No, ma'am. But I have raised many children and learned to observe. Observe, Mrs. Johnson repeated, a tone of irony in her voice. Clara, dear, you cannot base my grandson's care on the observations of an experienced person who managed to calm Michael in 5 minutes when professionals with degrees couldn't do it in weeks, Clara interrupted, surprising everyone, including herself. The silence that followed was tense. Mrs. Johnson was not used to being challenged, especially by Clara, who had always strived to maintain a harmonious relationship with her mother-in-law. Very well, Mrs. Johnson finally said. Let's see how long this miracle lasts. Teresa continued rocking Michael, who had stopped crying and was now watching the garden through the window. Mrs. Johnson, may I suggest something? How about we have coffee together tomorrow? I would like to get to know the family better and understand the household routine. The proposal was clever. Mrs. Johnson liked to be consulted, to feel important in family decisions. Her expression softened slightly. All right, but at 9 o'clock sharp. I don't like to be kept waiting. After Mrs. Johnson left, Clara approached Teresa. Thank you for not letting the situation get worse. Mrs. Clara, family is like a garden. Each plant has its needs, but they all have to coexist in the same space. Mrs. Johnson loves you all. She just has a different way of showing it. David was looking out the window, watching his grandmother descend the stone steps of the garden. She's going to try to test you, Teresa. She always did that with all the housekeepers. I know, Dr. David, but elderly people are like sensitive children. They need patience and understanding. Clara was late for her appointment but couldn't bring herself to leave. For the first time in weeks, she was seeing Michael truly calm, interacting with his surroundings curiously instead of defensively. Teresa, can you stay with him today? I'll cancel my appointments and... No, Dr. Clara, you need to work, and Michael needs to gradually get used to the new routine. Let's start slow. Throughout that day, Teresa implemented small changes. She turned off the air conditioning in Michael's room and opened the windows, allowing the natural breeze to circulate. She removed some electronic toys and replaced them with objects of different textures. A piece of velvet, a fabric doll, rattles made from natural materials. At lunchtime, instead of feeding him in the kitchen high chair, where there was too much noise from the refrigerator and microwave, Teresa took Michael to the backyard. They sat under the shade of a century-old mango tree, where only the sound of birds and leaves in the wind competed with the clinking of spoons against the plate. George watched everything from a distance, impressed. 40 years working in family homes, and I've never seen anything like it, he commented to the cook, Mrs. Edna, a 65-year-old woman who had worked for the Johnsons for a decade. That woman has something special, agreed Mrs. Edna. The boy seems different. When Clara arrived home that night, she found Michael playing quietly on the living room rug, surrounded by cushions and simple objects. Teresa was sitting on the floor next to him, showing him how to stack wooden blocks. The atmosphere was peaceful. Only the soft sound of a water fountain someone had turned on in the garden could be heard. How was your day? Clara asked, sitting on the sofa. Very good, Doctor. Michael ate everything for lunch, slept for 2 hours straight in the afternoon, and didn't cry once. Clara felt a mix of relief and a strange pang she preferred not to analyze. And what changes did you make? Small things. Less visual and auditory stimulation, more contact with nature, a more flexible routine based on his needs, not the clock. David arrived an hour later, carrying a stack of papers to grade. When he saw Michael playing calmly, he stopped at the living room door as if he were seeing a mirage. He's playing? Yes, Dr. David. Do you want to join us? David hesitated. His interactions with Michael had always been frustrated by the child's constant crying. But seeing his son so serene, he decided to give it a try. He sat down on the rug, and to his surprise, Michael crawled toward him, offering him a wooden block. Hi, my son, David said softly, following Teresa's example. Michael smiled and babbled something that sounded like Daddy. At that moment, Clara watching from the rocking chair, David on the floor playing with his son, and Teresa discreetly organizing the toys. The Johnson home was experiencing something it hadn't felt in a long time: peace. But Clara still carried an unease she couldn't name. Seeing Michael so connected with Teresa, so responsive to her care, awakened contradictory feelings she preferred to keep buried. Was it gratitude, relief, or something she feared to acknowledge? At 9 o'clock the next morning, Mrs. Johnson ascended the steps of the house like a queen inspecting her domain. She wore an impeccable beige linen suit, Italian leather shoes, and carried her vintage Hermes bag, a gift from her late husband. Her white hair had been styled at the salon the day before, and the French perfume she had worn for 40 years announced her presence before she even appeared. Teresa had prepared everything carefully. The patio table was set with the English china that Mrs. Johnson had given as a wedding gift to David and Clara, but with a personal touch. Small vases with African violets she had brought from home, creating a more welcoming atmosphere. The coffee was freshly brewed. There were still warm cheese breads that she had made in the early morning, and Michael was in his playpen nearby, quietly playing with wooden blocks. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson," Teresa greeted, making a small, respectful bow. "Do you prefer your coffee stronger or milder?" Mrs. Johnson surveyed the table with critical eyes, looking for flaws in the arrangement. "Strong. I've always had strong coffee." She sat in the cushioned wicker chair, adjusting her skirt with precision. "These flowers weren't here yesterday. I brought them from home, ma'am. I thought they would add a cheerful touch to our conversation." Mrs. Johnson tasted the coffee and couldn't hide a look of approval. "It's well made. Where did you learn to make coffee like this?" "From my great-grandmother, Mrs. Johnson. She used to say that well-made coffee is like a warm hug. It has to have the right measure of affection." Michael, who had become agitated when he heard Mrs. Johnson's voice, began to gradually calm down. Teresa had placed a fine cloth over part of the playpen, creating a sort of tent that reduced visual stimuli for him. "And this boy?" Mrs. Johnson gestured toward Michael. "Yesterday you said he has auditory sensitivity. Is there a cure for that?" "It's not an illness to be cured, Mrs. Johnson. It's like some people who are born with lighter eyes or straighter hair. It's a characteristic." Teresa served the still warm cheese bread. "Michael just needs us to understand his world and make small adjustments." "Adjustments like what?" "Like we're doing now. You'll notice you're speaking more softly than yesterday, naturally. And look at Michael." Mrs. Johnson observed her grandson, who was playing, calmly, occasionally glancing in their direction without showing agitation. "He is normal," she admitted, surprised. "He has always been normal, Mrs. Smith. He just needed us to learn his language." Mrs. Smith took another sip of coffee, studying Teresa with renewed interest. "Do you have family, children?" And the question hit Teresa like a blade. She hesitated for a moment, her hands gripping the cup more tightly. "I had a son, ma'am, Jack. We lost him when he was very young. I'm so sorry." Mrs. Smith's voice lost its haughty tone, gaining a nuance of genuine compassion. "Was it an illness?" Accident. He was 2 years old." Teresa looked at Michael, who had stopped playing and was watching her, as if sensing the sadness she carried. "After that, I took care of many children. Each one taught me something different about how to be strong." Mrs. Smith fell silent for a few moments. She herself had raised David after losing her son and daughter-in-law in an accident. She knew the pain of replacing lost motherhood with caring for a child she had not born. "That's why you understand so much about children," she said, more a statement than a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Pain teaches a lot about love." Michael began to whimper, and Teresa immediately stood up. "Excuse me, Mrs. Smith, time for a snack." Go on. I'll stay here." Teresa picked up Michael and returned to the table, sitting with him in her lap while offering small pieces of mashed banana. The boy ate calmly, occasionally looking at Mrs. Smith with curiosity instead of fear. "He's watching you," noted Mrs. Smith. "Children sense when a person has a good heart, even if they speak loudly," said Teresa, smiling. "Michael knows that you love him." "How do you know?" Because yesterday, when you entered the room, he didn't cry out of fear. He cried from surprise at the noise, but kept looking at you. If it were real fear, he would have hidden his face." Mrs. Smith hesitantly extended her hand toward Michael. To everyone's surprise, he touched her fingers with his little banana-smeared hand, leaving a mark on Grandma's gold rings. "Look at that," murmured Mrs. Smith, an involuntary smile appearing on her face. "He accepted me. He has always accepted you, Mom. He just needed a calmer environment to show it." At that moment, Clara appeared on the porch, already dressed for another day of work. She had overheard part of the kitchen conversation and was surprised by the cordial tone between Teresa and Mrs. Smith. "Good morning, Grandma Smith," greeted Clara, kissing her mother-in-law's cheek. "How is the conversation going?" "Enlightening," replied Mrs. Smith. "Teresa explained some things about Michael that make a lot of sense." Clara sat at the table, watching her son eat peacefully in Teresa's lap. The scene was so natural, so harmonious, that for a moment she felt like an intruder in her own family. "Teresa, could you explain it to me too? About Michael's sensitivity?" Teresa adjusted Michael in her lap. "Dr. Clara, imagine that you hear everything 5 times louder than normal. The noise of traffic becomes a roar. A normal conversation becomes a shout. The sound of the television becomes a siren." "That must be overwhelming," murmured Clara. "That's exactly what Michael felt. That's why he cried so much. He was trying to say that the world was too loud for him." Mrs. Smith interjected. "And why didn't the doctors notice this?" Because in the offices, Ma'am, Michael cried so much that the doctors couldn't observe the details. And also because this type of sensitivity doesn't show up in tests, only in everyday observation." Clara felt a weight in her chest. "Teresa, do you think we failed Michael? That we should have noticed earlier?" "Dr. Clara, you didn't fail. You did the best you could. Sometimes we need someone from the outside to see what is too close to us." David appeared on the porch, carrying a cup of coffee and his laptop under his arm. "Good morning, everyone. Grandma, good to see you here." "David, sit here," said Mrs. Smith, pointing to the chair next to her. "We need to talk about some changes in Michael's routine." David sat down, intrigued. "What kind of changes?" Teresa explained again about Michael's auditory sensitivity, but this time going into more practical details. "Dr. David, you need to have coffee away from Michael in the morning. The caffeine in the air makes him restless. And when you work from home, it's better to close the office door. The noise from the computer and video calls affects him." "But I like to work with the door open, to be close to the family," protested David. "And you can continue, Doctor. Just not when Michael is awake and nearby." Clara looked at the clock. "Guys, I need to go. I have a hearing at 10:30. She stood up but hesitated. "Teresa, do you think Michael misses me when I leave for work?" The question carried a vulnerability that Clara rarely showed. Teresa looked at her with understanding. "He does, Dr. Clara, but it's not a bad kind of missing. It's the missing of someone who loves. When you come home, he is happy, but he doesn't show it. Because until now you came home stressed, speaking loudly, in a hurry. Tonight, try to come home more slowly, speak softly. You will see the difference." Mrs. Smith watched the entire conversation with growing interest. "Clara, dear, I think Teresa's right. Maybe we all need to adjust the way we interact with Michael." After Clara left for work, David stayed on the porch, watching Teresa play with Michael on the mat she had spread in the shade. The boy was visibly more active and curious than in recent months. "Teresa," said David, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Doctor. Do you feel like you are raising Michael? I mean, sometimes I look at you two and you feel jealous," Teresa gently completed. David turned red. "It's true. I feel like a terrible parent for being jealous of someone who is helping my child." Mrs. Smith leaned forward, interested in the response. "Dr. David, jealousy is normal. But you need to understand one thing. I am not raising Michael. I'm taking care of him while you learn to be the parents he needs. My role is temporary. Your love is forever." "What do you mean, temporary?" asked Mrs. Smith, frowning. Michael won't need special care forever, Mrs. Smith. As he grows and the family adapts, my work will change. Maybe in a few months, I'll just be a housekeeper again, or perhaps I'll find another family that needs help. David felt a tightness in his chest. The idea of Teresa leaving, of Michael losing this stability he had finally found, terrified him. "What if we want you to stay?" "Permanently?" Teresa smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "Dr. David, you are a good family, but I come from a different world. One day you will realize that you no longer need me." "That's not true," said Mrs. Smith, surprising everyone with her vehemence. "Teresa, you've done in 2 days what psychologists and pediatricians couldn't do in months. You're not just an employee here, you are—" "What am I, Mrs. Smith?" "You are family." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Michael, oblivious to the adults' conversation, continued playing but occasionally glanced at Teresa, as if sensing that something important was being discussed about him. "Thank you, Mrs. Smith," Teresa finally said. "But real family is built with time, trust, and a lot of love. We are just beginning." David watched Michael try to stand up on his own, using Teresa's lap for support. It was the first time he had seen his son show such initiative, such a desire to explore the world around him. "Teresa, can you teach me how to interact with Michael the way you do?" "Of course, Dr. David. The first lesson is, forget everything you think you know about children and just observe what Michael is telling you." And so, under the shade of the century-old mango tree, with Mrs. Smith having her second cup of coffee and Michael exploring textures on the rug, a new phase in the Johnson family's life began, a phase where learning to listen would be more important than speaking, and where love would manifest not in grand gestures, but in small adjustments made with the heart. 2 weeks had passed since Teresa's arrival, and the transformation in the Johnson household was undeniable. Michael slept through the night, ate without resistance, and even practiced his first attempts at speaking, babbling mama, dada, and something that distinctly sounded like Tessa. The family's routine had naturally adjusted to the special care the boy needed, and for the first time in months, Clara was able to focus completely on her cases at the office. It was a Thursday morning when Teresa went upstairs to organize David's library. He had mentioned needing help cataloging some old books that had been piled in boxes since the last move. The library was the most private space in the house, a spacious room with mahogany shelves that reached from floor to ceiling, worn leather armchairs, and a desk where generations of Johnson men had worked. Michael was taking his afternoon nap, and the house was immersed in the kind of silence that had become precious to everyone. Teresa worked methodically, sorting the books by category: classic literature, contemporary works, academic essays. Her hands, accustomed to careful work, handled each volume with reverence, sometimes stopping to admire a special binding or a handwritten dedication. It was when she opened a box of older books that something fell from the pages of a worn copy of Dom Casmurro. It was a small notebook with a brown leather cover, tied with a thin cord. Natural curiosity made Teresa hesitate. It was clearly something personal, private. But when the wind from the open window blew some pages, she couldn't help but see the first lines written in David's recognizable handwriting. March 15th, 2023. Michael turned 6 months old today. Clara organized a small party, but I felt like a stranger in my own home. Do all parents feel this way? As if they are imposters trying to play a role for which they weren't given a script. Teresa immediately closed the notebook, her heart pounding. It was not her intention to violate David's privacy, but those words revealed a pain she had suspected but never confirmed. She looked around the library, as if expecting someone to appear to resolve her moral dilemma. Should she return the diary without mentioning what she saw? Or was there an opportunity to help David in a deeper way? The decision was made by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. David was coming up, probably looking for a book for his afternoon classes. Teresa quickly placed the diary on the table next to the stack of organized books and continued her work as if nothing had happened. "How's it going, Teresa?" David asked, entering the library with his usual gentle but slightly melancholic expression. "Well, Dr. David, I found many interesting works. You have a very rich collection." She gestured discreetly toward the table. "And I found this among the pages of a book. It must have fallen accidentally." David looked at the diary, and his face visibly paled. "Oh, that. I had lost it." He approached the table, picking up the notebook with trembling fingers. "Thank you for finding it." Teresa continued organizing the books, but discreetly observed David. He held the diary as if it were a bomb about to explode, clearly embarrassed by the possibility that she had read something. "Dr. David," she said softly without stopping her work, "sometimes writing our fears on paper helps us understand them better." Adaptações: Miguel, Michael, Joaquim, Jack, Dr. Gustavo, Dr. David, Doutora Clara, Dr. Clara, mamadeira, bottle, poltrona de amamentação, rocking chair, Dona Dalva, Mrs. Smith, avó, grandmother, criança, child, Dona Dalva Monteiro, Mrs. Johnson, Teresa, pães de queijo, cheese bread, berço, crib, História do Patinho Feio, Story of the Ugly Duckling, livro de contos infantis, children's storybook, tapete. He looked at her in surprise. You read?" "I only read one line by accident." The wind opened the page. Teresa turned to face him. "But it was enough to understand that you have some concerns about being a father." David sat heavily in the leather chair, still holding the diary. "Teresa, I feel like a failure as a father. Michael always seemed to prefer Clara, and now he prefers you. Sometimes I think he feels like I don't know what I'm doing." "And do you know?" The direct question caught David off guard. "No," he admitted. "I have no idea. When Michael was born, everyone expected me to instinctively know how to be a father. But I feel lost most of the time." Teresa stopped organizing the books and moved closer to the chair where David was sitting. "Can I sit?" He nodded, and she settled into the chair beside him. "Dr. David, can I share something? When my Jack was born, I also felt lost. Everyone talked as if a mother's love was automatic, but I looked at that little baby and thought, now what? What do I do with him?" David looked at her in surprise. "Really? But you seem so natural with Michael." "Because I learned, Doctor. I learned by making mistakes, getting it right, observing, asking other mothers. No one is born knowing how to be a parent. But Clara seems to have always known." "Dr. Clara is a lawyer, Dr. David. She's used to studying, researching, preparing for challenges. When Michael was born, she read all the books on motherhood, consulted experts, made plans. You tried to be a father in a more intuitive way, and I failed. You didn't fail. You just took a different approach." Teresa leaned slightly forward. "Michael doesn't prefer either me or Dr. Clara over you. He just responds differently to each of you because you offer different things." "What do you mean?" "Dr. Clara offers security, structure, protection. I offer calm, patience, care." "And you?" David thought for a moment. "I don't know what I offer. You offer imagination, sensitivity, creativity. Michael will need that as he grows. But maybe not in the way you're trying to give it. Explain further." Teresa stood up and walked to the shelf, picking up a children's storybook. "Have you tried telling stories to Michael?" "I've tried a few times, but he always cried or got fussy. Because you were trying to tell them as you would to an adult, with different voices, dramatic gestures, changes in tone. For Michael, that was too much stimulation." David opened the diary to a random page and read aloud. "Michael cried throughout the story of the ugly duckling today. Clara said he might be too young for stories, but other parents managed to tell stories to babies. Why doesn't it work for me?" Because you were trying to be a professional storyteller instead of being a father," Teresa explained gently. "Michael needed you to simply be present, speaking softly, letting him feel your closeness." At that moment, Michael woke from his nap, and his whimpers reached the library through the baby monitor. Teresa stood up to get him, but David stopped her. "Let me try," he said, putting the diary away in the desk drawer. Teresa hesitated. "Dr. David, remember, slowly, softly, no rush." David nodded and left the library. Teresa followed discreetly, stopping at the door of Michael's room to watch. David approached the crib slowly, his hands trembling slightly with nerves. "Hi, my son," he said softly. "Daddy's here." Michael looked at him with his curious green eyes, not crying, but also not reaching out his little arms like he did with Teresa or Clara. Michael didn't react badly, David murmured, more to himself. "That's already progress," Teresa encouraged from the door. David carefully picked Michael up, and the boy remained calm, watching his father's face with interest. For a few moments, they just looked at each other, father and son getting to know one another again. "He's so small," David whispered. "Sometimes I forget how small he is." "And strong," Teresa added. "Look how he holds onto your finger tightly." It was true. Michael had grasped David's index finger with his tiny hand, a simple gesture that touched the father's heart deeply. "Teresa, can you teach me how to tell stories to him the right way?" "Of course, Dr. David. But first you need to understand, there is no universal right way. There is the way that works for both of you." They went downstairs to the living room, where David sat in the chair with Michael in his lap. Teresa picked up a simple book with few words and soft illustrations. "Don't try to do different voices," she instructed. "Speak in your normal voice, just softer. And don't worry if he doesn't pay attention to the story. At this age, he's more interested in hearing your voice and feeling your presence." David opened the book and began to read. His voice, naturally melodic from his background in literature, took on a soft, hypnotic tone. Michael wasn't looking at the book, but was focused on his father's face, as if memorizing every feature. "Once upon a time, there was a little rabbit who loved to play in the garden." As David read, his tension visibly eased. Michael began to babble softly as if trying to participate in the story. "He likes it," Teresa observed, smiling. When David finished reading, Michael had completely relaxed in his lap, playing with the buttons of his father's shirt. It was the first time David truly felt connected to his son. "Thank you, Teresa," he said, emotional. "You helped me find something I thought I had lost." "What?" "The confidence that I can be a good father to him." At that moment, Clara came home from work early, surprising everyone. She stopped at the door of the living room, observing the scene. David relaxed in the chair with Michael in his lap, Teresa sitting on the rug organizing the toys, a warm atmosphere of complete peace. "What happened here?" she asked, but her tone was one of curiosity, not concern. "Dad told me a story," said David, using a childish voice that made Clara laugh for the first time in weeks. "And Michael liked it?" "He loved it. Look." David gently tickled Michael's belly, which produced a crystal-clear laugh that echoed through the house. Clara approached, still wearing her work suit, but knelt on the rug next to the rocking chair. "Can I join the next story?" "Of course," said David. "Teresa is teaching us how to do it right." Clara looked at Teresa with an expression that mixed gratitude and something more complex that she couldn't yet name. "Thank you for everything. You don't need to thank me. Dr. Clara, family is for this, to help each other be better." And for the first time since Michael was born, Clara, David, and the boy formed a truly harmonious tableau, united not only by blood, but by the realization that family love needed to be built day by day, with patience, understanding, and the wisdom to accept help when needed. Teresa watched the scene with a full heart, but also with a hint of melancholy that she couldn't explain. Her hands unconsciously touched the beaded bracelet that had belonged to her great-grandmother, and for a moment she wondered if she was getting too attached to this family that wasn't hers, but that each day felt more like the home she never thought she would have again. Teresa's third month in the Johnson household brought a stability that the family had forgotten was possible. Michael woke up smiling, played quietly during the day, and slept through the night. David had regained his confidence as a father, spending at least 2 hours daily telling stories and playing with his son. Clara, in turn, was able to focus entirely on her cases, knowing that Michael was in safe and loving hands. It was a March morning when Clara woke up with a nausea unlike anything she had ever felt. She rushed to the suite bathroom, and after a few minutes of looking at herself in the mirror, a terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. It couldn't be. She and David had been careful, especially after all the turmoil of the first months with Michael. "Clara, are you okay?" David's concerned voice came from the bedroom. "I'm great," she lied, splashing cold water on her face. "It must be something I ate yesterday." But throughout the morning, as she tried to concentrate on reviewing a complex case in her office in downtown Washington, D.C., Clara couldn't stop doing calculations. When had her last period been? With all the hustle of the past months, she had lost track of the dates. During lunch, instead of going to the restaurant where she usually met colleagues, Clara drove to a pharmacy in a distant neighborhood where she wouldn't risk running into anyone she knew. She bought 3 different pregnancy tests, as if more tests could change a possible positive result. Back in the office, she locked herself in the private bathroom and took all 3 tests, all positive. Clara sat on the closed toilet seat, holding the small plastic objects that had just turned her life upside down, and cried for the first time in years. These were not tears of joy. They were tears of panic, exhaustion, and a deep guilt she couldn't explain. Michael had consumed all her emotional energy in recent months. How could she handle another baby now that she had finally found balance? She arrived home at 6 in the evening, earlier than usual, and found the scene that had become precious in recent times. David on the living room rug with Michael telling a story, while Teresa prepared dinner in the kitchen. The smell of seasoned beans and the sound of David's gentle voice created a homey atmosphere that usually calmed her. Today, it only intensified her anxiety. "You got home early today," David commented, looking up from the book he was reading to Michael. "I finished the most urgent cases," Clara said, taking off her blazer and trying to appear normal. "How was your day?" "Michael took 3 steps on his own today," David announced proudly. "Teresa saw it first and called me. We managed to get him to do it again." "That's wonderful," Clara forced a smile. "Where's Teresa?" "In the kitchen. She made that stew you like." Clara found Teresa stirring a clay pot, her face focused as she adjusted the seasoning. The woman had become more than an employee. She was like part of the family, someone everyone instinctively trusted. "Teresa, I need to talk to you." "Of course, Dr. Clara. Is something wrong?" Clara hesitated. How to tell an employee something she hadn't even told her husband yet? But there was something about Teresa that inspired confidence, a maternal wisdom that Clara felt she desperately needed. "I'm pregnant." The words came out abruptly, without preamble. Teresa stopped stirring the stew and turned completely to face Clara. "Is that good news, or—" "I don't know." Clara collapsed into a kitchen chair. "Teresa, I can barely handle Michael. How will I manage 2 small children?" Teresa dried her hands on her apron and approached. "Have you told Dr. David?" "Not yet. I found out this afternoon." "And are you scared?" "I'm terrified." Clara rested her head in her hands. "With Michael, I thought I knew what I was doing. I read all the books, took all the courses, and still I almost went crazy in the first months. Now, with 2. Teresa sat in the chair beside her. "Dr. Clara, can I ask you a personal question?" Clara nodded. "Do you want to have another child?" The question hit Clara like a punch. She had spent the entire day thinking about the practical difficulties, the impact on her career, the changes in routine. But she hadn't asked herself if she really wanted another baby. I always wanted Michael. If I had a brother," she said slowly, "but I thought it would be when he was older, when I felt more secure as a mother." "And do you feel secure as a mother now?" Clara looked through the kitchen door, where she could see David and Michael playing. "More than before. Thanks to you." Then maybe it's the right time. Teresa, you don't understand. My career is at its peak. I have 3 big cases coming to court, a second child now. It will mean reorganizing some things, not giving everything up, Teresa gently completed. At that moment, David appeared in the kitchen with Michael in his arms. What are you two conspiring about? Clara and Teresa exchanged glances. Nothing much, Clara said. Just talking about work. David sensed the tension in the air but decided not to press. Michael is hungry. Can we have dinner? During dinner, Clara barely touched her food. She watched David cutting Michael's food into small pieces, making silly faces for the boy to eat, and tried to imagine the same scene with 2 small children. The thought made her dizzy. Clara, are you okay? You're very quiet today, David observed. Just tired. It was an intense day at the office. After putting Michael to bed, a task that was now harmoniously shared among the 3 adults in the house, Clara finally gathered the courage to talk to David. They were on the back porch, where Teresa had created a small herb garden that scented the evenings. David, I have something to tell you. Clara's serious tone immediately caught his attention. What is it? Is there a problem at work? I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was deafening. David froze completely, processing the information. Pregnant, he repeated, as if testing the word. How far along? I took the test today. It should be about 6 weeks. David got up from the wicker chair and walked to the porch railing, looking at Teresa's garden. How do you feel about it? Confused, scared. And you? David turned to face her. Honestly, the first thing I thought was, how are we going to manage? But the second was, Michael is going to have a little brother. And is that good or bad? I think it's good, Clara. Scary, but good. Clara moved closer to her husband. David, this time will be different. We already know some things about kids. We have Teresa. Clara, did you realize that you're automatically including Teresa in our plans? The observation made her stop. It was true. In thinking about the pregnancy, she had automatically assumed that Teresa would be there to help. But what if she wasn't? Do you think she would stay? I don't know. I think we need to talk to her. Now? No, let her rest. We'll talk tomorrow. But Clara, even if Teresa doesn't stay, we'll manage. We're different from the parents we were when Michael was born. Clara leaned against David's chest, feeling the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the aroma of the herbs from the garden. I'm afraid this time will be even harder. Why? Because now I know how hard it is. The first time I was ignorant. I thought love was enough. And it isn't. It's necessary, but it's not enough. It needs patience, knowledge, support. And luck. David stroked his wife's hair. Clara, we're going to have all of that, and if we don't, we'll learn along the way, just like we did with Michael. That night, lying in bed next to David, who was sleeping soundly, Clara placed her hand on her still flat belly and tried to imagine another baby growing inside. Would it be easier this time, knowing the special sensitivity she could expect, or would it be harder, having to divide attention between 2 small children? In the back room, Teresa also couldn't sleep. She had noticed the signs during the day. Clara, arriving home early, the whispered conversations in the kitchen, the way she barely touched her food during dinner. Her experience with pregnant women made her recognize the clues. Another child in that house would mean more work, more responsibility, more emotional involvement. Teresa wondered if she was ready to become even more attached to a family that deep down she knew wasn't hers. But when she thought about the possibility of leaving Michael and now another baby, she felt a pain in her chest that she preferred not to analyze too deeply. She got out of bed and went to the window overlooking the garden. The plants she had cared for so lovingly thrived under the moonlight. Just as Michael had flourished under her care, Perhaps this was her destiny, to care for gardens and children that belonged to others, leaving a little piece of herself in every place she passed through. She touched the great-grandmother's beaded bracelet and whispered a prayer for wisdom. Tomorrow, she would have to make decisions that would affect not only her life but the future of an entire family. And for the first time since she arrived at that house, Teresa wasn't sure what the right choice was. The next morning brought a heavy atmosphere that seemed to anticipate the storm that was coming. Clara woke up with more intense nausea and had to miss work for the first time in years. David cancelled his morning classes to stay home, worried about his wife's condition. Michael, with his heightened sensitivity, sensed the tension in the air and was clingier than usual, wanting to be held constantly. Teresa was preparing ginger tea for Clara when George appeared in the kitchen with a serious expression she hadn't seen in the 15 years she had known the driver. "Teresa, can I talk to you for a minute?" She followed him to the service area, away from the family's ears. George held a white envelope in his trembling hands. "What is this, George?" "It arrived in the mail early today. It's for you, but—" He hesitated. "Teresa, I recognize the logo of this company. It's an investigation agency." Teresa's blood ran cold in her veins. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and pulled out an official letter. It was a private investigation report commissioned by Mrs. Johnson, containing detailed information about her life, where she was born, where she worked, her criminal history, none, references from previous jobs, and on the last page, the information she feared most to see in writing. Jack Johnson, son of Teresa Johnson, deceased on July 12, 2004, at the age of 2. Cause of death: accidental drowning in a pond near the family home in a small town. Teresa's legs gave way, and she leaned against the washing machine. George held her arm, concerned. "Teresa, what does it say?" "Mrs. Smith had my whole life investigated," she said, her voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. Including what happened to my son." George read over her shoulder, and his face contorted in pain. "Oh, Teresa." "I'm so sorry. 20 years, George. 20 years that I haven't talked about this in detail with anyone. And now it's here, written on paper, as if it were just another fact." At that moment, they heard Mrs. Smith's voice echoing down the hallway. "Teresa, where are you? I need to talk to you." Teresa quickly tucked the papers back into the envelope and wiped her eyes. "She's coming to confront me. Do you want me to stay here?" George offered. "No, this is between me and her." Mrs. Smith appeared in the laundry area, wearing a grey suit, her hair immaculate and her expression stern. But when she saw Teresa's face, her expression softened slightly. "I see you received the correspondence," she said bluntly. "I did, Mrs. Smith. Do you want me to leave?" "I want you to explain why you lied by omission." Teresa took a deep breath. "I didn't lie. You asked if I had experience with children, and I do. You asked if I had references, and I provided them. You didn't ask if I had lost a child, but you should have told me. Why? So you could look at me with pity? So you could doubt my ability to care for Michael?" Mrs. Smith stepped closer, and for the first time since they met, her voice lost its authoritative tone. "Teresa, I didn't have you investigated out of malice. I did it because I saw how you bonded with Michael and how he bonded with you. I wanted to understand why. And do you understand now? Now I understand that you're trying to save Michael because you couldn't save your own son." The words hit Teresa like slaps. She stepped away from Mrs. Smith, her eyes burning with held-back tears. "You know nothing about what happened to Jack. Then tell me." For a long moment they stared at each other. Finally, Teresa sat down in a plastic chair and began to speak, her voice low but firm. "Jack was like Michael. Sensitive, affectionate, intelligent. I worked in a family home in a small town, and I took him with me because I had no one to leave him with. It was July, very hot. The lady of the house said he could play in the yard while I cleaned the house." Mrs. Smith sat in the chair next to her, listening intently. There was a pond in the back of the property, small but deep. Jack was playing near the porch, and I was watching him from the kitchen window. Then the phone rang. The lady of the house asked me to answer it because she was in the shower. It was 3 minutes, Mrs. Smith. 3 minutes that changed my life forever. What happened? When I returned to the window, I didn't see Jack in the yard. I ran outside, calling his name. I found him in the pond. Teresa paused, breathing heavily. I tried everything. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, chest compressions. I screamed for help. But by the time help arrived, it was too late. Mrs. Smith was visibly emotional. Teresa, it wasn't your fault. Everyone said that. The police, the doctors, the neighbors. But I know the truth, Mrs. Smith. If I hadn't answered that phone, if I had kept an eye on him, Jack would be alive. And do you think taking care of Michael will make up for that? Teresa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I think God gave me a second chance to protect a child. Michael needs me, and I need him. At that moment, Clara appeared in the laundry area, pale and holding an empty cup. Teresa, can you make more tea? And Grandma Smith, I'm glad you're here. We need to talk to you. Mrs. Smith and Teresa exchanged a quick glance. Of course, dear. What is it? I'm pregnant. The announcement fell like a bomb in the small space. Mrs. Smith was taken aback, and Teresa, still shaken from the previous conversation, felt a mix of joy and panic. Pregnant? Clara, that's wonderful. Mrs. Smith stood up to hug her daughter-in-law. When did you find out? Yesterday. I'm 6 weeks along. Mrs. Smith looked at Teresa. And did you already know? Dr. Clara told me last night, Teresa confirmed. Well, then we need to talk about arrangements. With 2 small babies, you're going to need more help. Clara sat down in the chair that Mrs. Smith had vacated. That's exactly what we want to talk about. Teresa, would you stay with us? Permanently? Teresa looked at the investigation envelope in her hands and then at the 2 women in front of her. Dr. Clara, after what Mrs. Smith found out about me, do you still want me to stay? Clara frowned. What did she find out? Mrs. Smith interjected, Clara, I had an investigation done on Teresa, and I found out that she lost a child 20 years ago. Clara looked at Teresa in shock. Is it true? It's true, Teresa confirmed. And now you know why I understand so much about children and why I bond so closely with Michael. Clara stood up and walked over to Teresa, holding her hands. Teresa, I'm so sorry for your loss. But that doesn't change how we feel about you. Dr. Clara, you saved our family. You saved Michael, you saved my marriage, you saved me as a mother. I don't care what happened in your past matters. What matters is who you are now. Mrs. Johnson observed the scene with a thoughtful expression. Clara is right, Teresa. I had you investigated because I wanted to understand why you were so special with Michael. Now I understand, and it only makes me respect you more. Teresa stood up, still holding Clara's hands. You all need to understand one thing. I love Michael as if he were my own son. And if you stay, I will love this baby that is coming too. But one day you might decide that you have gotten too attached to me, or I to you, and then what? Clara asked. And then we will all suffer when I have to leave. Who said you have to leave? Mrs. Johnson interjected. Teresa, you are part of this family now, not as a housekeeper, but as a second mother to the children. Is that real? Teresa asked, barely daring to believe it. Clara smiled, and for the first time in days, she seemed truly happy. It's real. We want you to stay, Teresa, not just to take care of the children, but because you are part of our lives now. At that moment, Michael appeared in the service area, having escaped from David. Upon seeing Teresa, he stretched out his arms and clearly said, Tessa. It was the first real word he had spoken, and all 3 women laughed through their tears. I think Michael has already voted, said Mrs. Johnson, picking up her grandson. Teresa looked at the investigation envelope in her hands and without hesitation tore it in half. Then it's decided. I'm staying. And so, on a morning that had begun with painful revelations and difficult confrontations, the Johnson family found a way to become even stronger, officially incorporating into their structure a woman who had come as a housekeeper but had become the emotional heart of the home. 3 months passed since the revelation of the pregnancy and Teresa's decision to stay permanently with the family. Clara was in her 5th month of pregnancy, with a discreet but visible belly under her fitted suits. The household routine had settled into an almost perfect rhythm. Michael, now almost 2 years old, spoke small phrases and displayed a sweet and curious personality. David had found his place as a father and writer, and Teresa had officially become the housekeeper, with her own room on the 1st floor and a salary that reflected her new position in the family. It was a rainy Thursday in June when everything began to crumble. Clara had gone out for an important hearing when she felt the first pains. She was at the Washington, D.C. courthouse in the middle of her defense in a homicide case that had consumed months of preparation, when an intense cramp made her lean on the jury table. "Dr. Clara, are you okay?" the judge asked, noticing her sudden pallor. "I'm fine, Your Honor, just a little discomfort." But when Clara looked down, she saw a small stain of blood on her beige skirt. Panic completely overtook her. "I request a brief recess, Your Honor. I need to step out for a moment." In the courthouse bathroom, Clara desperately called David. "David, I need to go to the hospital now." "What happened?" "The baby? I'm bleeding." "Not much, but..." Her voice broke. "David, I'm so scared. I'm coming to get you." "Where are you?" "At the courthouse." "But you have Michael. Teresa can stay with him." "Hang in there, love. I'm on my way." David hung up the phone and rushed to find Teresa, who was in the backyard with Michael, teaching him to identify the different plants in the garden. "Teresa, Clara is at the hospital. I need to go now." Teresa's face paled. "The baby?" "I don't know. She's bleeding." David grabbed the car keys with trembling hands. "Can you stay with Michael?" "Of course. Go, and call me as soon as you know anything." At Washington General Hospital, Clara was immediately taken to an obstetric emergency room. The doctor, Dr. Henry Smith, a 50-year-old man with the calm authority of someone who has lived through many crises, examined Clara carefully while David held her hand. "Clara, you have had a partial placental abruption," the doctor explained, removing his gloves after the examination. "It's not rare, but it's serious. I need you to be on complete bed rest for the next few weeks." "Complete bed rest?" Clara propped herself on her elbows. "Doctor, I have 3 cases going to trial this month." "I can't." "Clara, you could lose the baby," the doctor interrupted, his tone grave. "And depending on how it progresses, it could put your own life at risk." The silence in the room was deafening. David squeezed his wife's hand, feeling her tremble. "How long of bed rest?" David asked. "At least 4 weeks, maybe more. We'll monitor you every 2 days." "And Michael?" Clara whispered. "He's still so small, he needs attention." "That's why Teresa is with us," David said. "She'll handle everything." But when they got home that night, the reality of the situation proved to be more complex than they had imagined. Clara needed to lie down most of the time, only able to get up to go to the bathroom and take a shower. Michael, sensing the drastic change in routine and energy in the house, began to exhibit behavioral regressions he hadn't shown in months. "Mommy! Mommy!" he cried, trying to climb onto the bed where Clara was resting, but unable to be picked up due to medical restrictions. "Michael, sweetheart, Mommy can't pick you up right now." "Come with Daddy!" David tried, but Michael threw himself on the floor, crying desperately. It was Teresa who managed to calm him down, but the physical and emotional effort of caring for a high-risk pregnant woman, a small child in crisis, and an increasingly anxious husband was beginning to take its toll. "Teresa, you can't do everything alone," Clara said one night when Teresa came up for the 3rd time to check if she needed anything. "I can, Dr. Clara, that's what I'm here for. But you're exhausted. I see your dark circles. I can see how your hands are trembling from exhaustion." Teresa sat in the chair next to the bed. "Dr. Clara, do you remember what I told you about Jack?" "I remember. When he died, I made a promise to God. If he gave me another chance to protect a child, I wouldn't fail. Michael and this baby on the way are my second chance. Teresa, you didn't fail Jack. It was an accident. I know that in my head, Dr. Clara, but in my heart—" Teresa touched her chest. "In my heart it still hurts, and taking care of you helps make that pain make sense." The following week, the situation worsened when David received the news that his research grant at the university would not be renewed. It was a significant amount that helped supplement the family budget, especially with the extra medical expenses from the high-risk pregnancy. "What do you mean it won't be renewed?" Clara leaned against the headboard, trying to stay calm. "You've been in this project for 5 years. Budget cuts. They only kept researchers with completed PhDs. Since I'm still finishing my thesis." David sat heavily in the room's armchair. "Clara, how are we going to pay for private consultations, the health insurance, the house?" "And Teresa?" Clara asked, the financial reality hitting her. "David, we promised her she could stay permanently. We increased her salary." "We can't let Teresa go now," David said, running his hands through his hair. "Besides being unfair, you need her. Michael needs her. So what do we do?" "We're going to have to sell the house." The words hung in the air like a sentence. The house in Georgetown was not just where they lived. It was the symbol of everything they had built together, the legacy they wanted to leave for their children, the place where Michael had taken his first steps. "Are you sure there's no other alternative?" Clara asked, tears streaming down her face. "I've done the calculations 1,000 times, love. With your cases on hold due to bed rest, my grant cut, and now the extra medical expenses. The mortgage is too high. If we sell, we can buy something smaller and still have some money left for the next few months." That night, they told Teresa about the decision. She was preparing a calming tea for Clara when David called her for a talk in the kitchen. "Teresa, we need to tell you something. We're going to have to sell the house." Teresa stopped stirring the tea. "Because of the expenses with me?" "No," David said quickly. "It has nothing to do with you. It's the overall financial situation. I lost the grant at the university. Clara can't work. And you want me to look for another job? No, we want you to come with us wherever we move. But it will be a smaller house. Maybe you won't have a room just for you. The salary might have to be adjusted." Teresa looked out the window at the garden she had lovingly cultivated over the past few months. The plants she had brought from the small town had adapted well to the soil in Washington, D.C., creating a little corner that was just hers. "Where are you thinking of moving?" "We're looking at apartments in Garcia. Smaller, cheaper, but in a good neighborhood." "And Michael? How will he react to another big change?" "We don't know," David admitted. "We're all trying to deal with too many changes at once." Teresa finished preparing the tea and turned to face David. "Dr. David, can I suggest something?" "Of course. What if I talk to Mrs. Johnson? Maybe she can help with something or know someone who can." "Teresa, we don't want to borrow money from family." "It's not borrowing. It's accepting help when we need it. Family is for that." The next morning, Teresa called Mrs. Johnson and explained the situation. The matriarch's reaction was immediate and practical. "Teresa, why didn't you tell me sooner? Of course, I will help. David is my grandson. Michael is my great-grandson. I won't let you go through hardships out of pride. Mrs. Johnson, they don't want charity. And it's not charity. It's family taking care of family. I'll propose something to them. I'll buy the house. They can keep living there, paying rent that fits their budget. When David graduates and Clara goes back to work, they can buy it back." When Teresa presented the proposal to Clara and David, the initial reaction was one of resistance. "We can't accept," Clara said. "It would be humiliating." "Humiliating would be losing the house and having to explain to Michael why he can't play in his garden anymore," Teresa retorted. "Dr. Clara, sometimes we need to swallow our pride to protect what's most important." David reflected for a long moment. "And if we accept and then can't buy it back?" "You'll cross that bridge when you get to it," Teresa said. "For now, the important thing is that you stay in your home. Michael doesn't go through another traumatic change, and I can continue taking care of all of you." And so it was that, amid the perfect storm of medical, financial, and emotional crises, the Johnson family learned that sometimes accepting help is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. And Teresa once again proved to be not just the caregiver of the children, but the guardian of the emotional stability of the entire family. That night, while Clara slept peacefully for the first time in weeks and Michael dreamed in his family room. Teresa knelt in her garden and thanked for having a family that, even without sharing her blood, treated her as one of their own. And for the first time in 20 years, she felt that perhaps she could stop carrying all the guilt for Jack's death, allowing herself to be truly happy again. August brought one of the biggest storms of the decade to Washington, D.C. The wind howled between the windows of the Georgetown house, and the rain pounded fiercely on the colonial tiles as Clara entered. Clara was in premature labor at 35 weeks of pregnancy. "David, David!" Clara shouted from the bed at 3 in the morning, feeling the intense contractions that woke her abruptly. "The baby is coming." David jumped out of bed, still disoriented from sleep, but quickly realized the gravity of the situation when he saw Clara doubled over in pain, her hands clutching her belly. "Already? But there are still 5 weeks to go." "Tell that to your daughter." Clara groaned between contractions. "Call Teresa and let's go to the hospital." Teresa appeared in the room within seconds, as if she had already been awake, waiting for this moment. She wore a simple nightgown and slippers, but her movements were precise and organized. "Dr. Clara, how far apart are the contractions?" I think." "Oh my God!" "I think they're 5 minutes apart." "All right, let's stay calm." "Dr. David, grab the hospital bag." "It's in the hallway closet." Teresa moved closer to Clara, holding her hand. "Take a deep breath, doctor." The baby is eager to meet the family. While David rushed around the house looking for keys, documents, and the hospital bag, Teresa remained calm beside Clara, guiding her breathing and massaging her back. "And Michael?" Clara asked through the pain. "He's going to wake up with all this noise. George is coming over. He'll stay with Michael until we get back." "How did you—" "See, I already called him. And Dr. Henry, too. They are waiting for you at the hospital." Teresa's silent efficiency in moments of crisis always impressed the family. While everyone else panicked, she seemed to have a plan for every emergency. The drive to the hospital was tense. David drove nervously through the heavy rain, his hands sweaty on the steering wheel, while Clara groaned in the back seat with Teresa beside her, timing the contractions. 3 minutes! Teresa announced. "Dr. David, can you speed up a bit?" "I'm trying, but the rain is so heavy I can't see properly." "David," Clara gripped Teresa's arm tightly, "what if something goes wrong?" "It's too early. The baby isn't ready." "Dr. Clara, babies born at 35 weeks are healthy every day. And your daughter is strong, just like her mother. How do you know it's a girl?" Teresa smiled, even in the tension of the moment. "A woman's intuition. And the way you've carried your belly these last few months. At the hospital, everything happened very quickly." Clara was taken immediately to the delivery room, where Dr. Henry and his team were already prepared. David, wearing surgical scrubs, held his wife's hand as she pushed. "One more, Clara." "I can see the head," encouraged the doctor. "I can't do it anymore," Clara cried, exhausted after 2 hours of labor. "You can, love," David said, kissing her sweaty forehead. "Our daughter is almost here, and finally, at 6:15 in the morning, with the sun rising after the storm, Helena Johnson was born, 3 kilograms and 200 grams of a perfect baby, crying vigorously to announce her arrival into the world. "It's a girl," confirmed Dr. Henry, placing the baby on Clara's chest. "And she's completely healthy. Her lungs are great." Clara looked at her daughter, small but strong, with a thick head of dark hair, and began to cry with relief and joy. "Hi, Helena. Mommy waited so long for you." David was too emotional to speak. He simply watched his wife and daughter, feeling a love so intense it hurt in his chest. Teresa had stayed in the waiting room throughout the delivery, and pacing back and forth, praying softly and calming Grandma Smith, who had arrived at the hospital still in her nightgown under a coat, having left home in the middle of the night when George notified her. "How is she?" Grandma Smith asked when David appeared in the waiting room with a radiant smile. "Perfect. Completely perfect. Helena was born healthy. Clara is fine. Everything went perfectly." Teresa let herself fall into a plastic chair, relief flooding over her completely. "Thank God," she murmured, touching the beaded bracelet of her great-grandmother. "And Michael? How is he?" David asked. "George texted an hour ago. He slept through the night, didn't even notice you left." 2 hours later, when Clara was settled in the maternity room with Helena in the crib beside her, Teresa entered holding Michael's hand. The boy, now 2 years old, looked around with curiosity and a bit of apprehension. "Michael, come meet your little sister," Clara said, extending her arms to her son. Michael approached slowly, observing the baby in the crib. Helena was sleeping soundly, her tiny fists clenched beside her face. "Baby," Michael said, gently touching his sister's little hand. "That's right, love. This is Helena, your little sister." Michael looked at Teresa as if seeking confirmation. "Tessa, will the baby stay?" "Yes, my love, forever." It was at that moment that Clara noticed a subtle but significant change in the family dynamic. Michael didn't run into her arms as he used to before Helena was born. Instead, he stayed beside Teresa, holding her hand as if she were his main source of security. The realization hit her like a punch in the stomach. During the months of rest, when she couldn't give Michael the attention he needed, Teresa had become his primary maternal figure. And now, with a newborn demanding constant attention, Michael naturally gravitated toward the person who offered him the emotional stability he knew. "Michael, come here with Mommy," Clara said, trying to hide the sadness in her voice. Michael looked at her, then at Helena, and finally at Teresa. "Tessa, too." "Of course Tessa can stay here," Clara said, but there was a twinge of pain in her response. David watched the scene with growing understanding. He himself had gone through similar feelings when Michael had clung to Teresa in the early months. But now, with 2 children and the financial pressures they faced, the dynamic was becoming even more complicated. "Clara," he said softly, "let's talk about this at home. It's time to celebrate Helena." In the following days, establishing a routine with 2 small children proved to be more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Helena was a relatively calm baby, but she still woke up every 2 hours to feed. Michael, feeling the drastic change in the attention he received, began to exhibit regressive behaviors. He started wetting the bed again, wanted to drink from a bottle like Helena, and had crying fits when Clara or David focused on the baby. "This isn't normal jealousy," Teresa observed one morning while calming Michael after one of his episodes. "He feels replaced, but we try to give equal attention to both," Clara protested, exhausted after a sleepless night. "Dr. Clara, with all due respect, but the attention isn't equal. Helena needs basic survival care, eating, sleeping, diaper changes. Michael needs emotional connection, playtime, stories. They have different needs. And how do we resolve this? By dividing the tasks better. Dr. David can take more responsibility for Michael, you for Helena, and I can help both as needed." The proposal made logistical sense, but emotionally it was complicated. Clara still struggled with feelings of maternal inadequacy, especially seeing how Michael naturally connected with Teresa and how David seemed more confident caring for him. "Sometimes I feel like a stranger in my own family," Clara confessed to David one night while Helena slept between them in bed. "Why do you say that?" "Michael prefers Teresa over me. You've become the fun, creative dad I always wanted to be as a mom. And Helena," she looked at her daughter, "Helena is still too young to have preferences, but what if she also prefers others over me?" David turned to face his wife. "Clara, you're being too hard on yourself. Michael doesn't prefer Teresa over you. He has different bonds with different people, and Helena will love you just as you are. But Teresa is so natural with them. She knows exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it. I still feel lost most of the time. And you think that's bad, isn't it?" "Clara, you're a lawyer. Your mind works analytically, structurally. Teresa has an intuitive wisdom based on experience. You both offer different and complementary things to our children." That night, when Helena woke up to feed, Clara had a revelation. While nursing her daughter in the silence of the house, listening to the soft sounds of everyone else sleeping, she realized that perhaps she had been trying to compete instead of collaborate. Teresa wasn't a rival. She was a partner in raising their children. Michael didn't love her less because he loved Teresa too. Love wasn't a limited resource that needed to be divided, but rather something that multiplied when shared. The next morning, Clara woke up with renewed determination. She found Teresa in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, while Michael played on the living room floor with wooden blocks. "Teresa, I want to learn." "Learn what, Dr. Clara?" "I want to learn to be a mother in a way that works for me. Not trying to copy you or David, but finding my own way to connect with Michael and Helena." Teresa smiled, and for the first time in weeks, Clara saw in that smile not a maternal superiority but a feminine alliance. "Then let's start now. Michael, come here. Mommy wants to play with you." And so, little by little, the family began to find a new balance, one where each member had their unique and valued role, where Teresa was recognized not as a maternal substitute, but as a loving extension of the family that allowed everyone to be better versions of themselves. December arrived in Washington, D.C., with that humid and intense heat that precedes summer. Helena had turned 4 months old and was already showing signs of the same sensitivity as Michael. She preferred quiet environments and calmed down with Teresa's soft voice. Michael, now 2.5 years old, had adapted well to the role of big brother, especially after Clara and David found ways to give him individual attention. The family had established a harmonious routine. David primarily cared for Michael, telling stories and playing in the garden. Clara divided her time between Helena and her gradual return to work, with smaller cases that allowed more flexibility. And Teresa coordinated the entire household with her quiet wisdom, being the glue that kept everyone together. It was on a Thursday afternoon, while organizing Helena's medical documents for a routine checkup, that Clara stumbled upon an envelope that had been delivered to Dr. Henry's office, but had accidentally mixed in with her papers. The envelope was addressed to the clinical laboratory and contained routine prenatal blood test results she had done months earlier. Curious, Clara opened the envelope and saw that it contained blood type results and other compatibility tests. Her eyes scanned the numbers automatically until they stopped at a specific line that made her sit up abruptly in her home office chair. "Paternity test. Genetic incompatibility detected." Clara read the line 3 times before the full meaning hit her. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and called the laboratory. "Hello, this is Clara Johnson. I accidentally received a test result. Can you explain to me what exactly genetic incompatibility detected means?" The laboratory's technical voice confirmed her worst fears. Her, David's and Michael's blood types were not compatible with a biological father-child relationship. It was impossible for David to be Michael's biological father. Clara hung up the phone and sat in silence for a full hour, her hands shaking, her mind racing through memories she had buried deep. Raphael, the criminal lawyer she had worked with on a complex case 2 years before Michael was born. The late nights working until dawn, the adaptações, Miguel, Michael, Rafael, Ryan, Dr. Gustavo, Dr. David, Doutora Clara, Dr. Clara, Teresa, Mamãe, Mommy, Pesadelo, Nightmare. Papai, Daddy Clara felt the sexual tension that had grown between them. The only night of weakness when David was traveling for a literature conference. She had convinced herself that Michael was David's son. The dates could match, the blood types had never been questioned by the doctors, and she had buried that guilt so deeply that she almost believed her own lie. But now, with the raw truth before her eyes, Clara felt her world completely crumble. That night, after the children were asleep and Teresa had retreated to her room, Clara called David for a conversation on the back porch, where so many important family decisions had been made. "David, I need to tell you something. Something that will change everything between us." Clara's grave tone immediately alerted David. "What is it? Is there a health issue? Helena's tests?" "It's not about Helena." Clara took a deep breath, touching the envelope in her hands. "It's about Michael." "Michael? What about him?" "David." Clara paused, knowing that once she said those words, there would be no turning back. "Michael is not your biological son. The silence that followed was deafening. David stood completely still, as if the words hadn't reached him. "What did you say?" "I mistakenly received a lab test result. They did blood typing for us and Michael. It's impossible for you to be his father." David slowly rose from the chair, stepping away from Clara as if she were radioactive. "Are you telling me that you cheated on me?" "It was just once, David, one night over 3 years ago. You were traveling. I was working on a tough case with Ryan and—" "Ryan," David repeated the name as if it were poison. "The Ryan you brought to dinner here a few times. The Ryan who played with Michael on his lap. David, I thought Michael was yours. I really believed—" "You thought?" David exploded, his voice echoing through the garden. "Clara, you slept with another man, got pregnant, and thought the child was mine?" "Lower your voice, please." "The kids— Don't tell me what to do." David walked to the porch railing, his hands gripping the stone tightly. 3 years, Clara. 3 years raising a child. Falling in love with him. Worrying if I was a good father. Trying to understand why he reacted differently with me. David, Michael reacts differently with you because he has a special sensitivity, not because— "Stop." David turned to her, his eyes shining with anger and pain. "Don't try to rationalize this now. You lied to me for 3 years. Clara stood up, trying to approach, but David backed away. "I didn't consciously lie. I really believed. And now, what do you want me to do with this information? To stop loving Michael? To leave the house? To forgive and pretend nothing happened?" "I don't know," Clara confessed, tears streaming down her face. "I just knew I couldn't hide this from you." At that moment, a soft voice manifested behind them. "Excuse me?" They turned to see Teresa standing at the porch door, wearing her pajamas and with an expression that indicated she had heard at least part of the conversation. "Teresa, this is not—" Clara began. "It's your business, I know. But the voices were loud and I was worried." Teresa approached slowly. "And also because this affects Michael and Helena." "How does it affect?" David asked, still trembling with anger. "Because you both will have to decide what is more important, who planted the seed or who watered the plant." The simple yet powerful metaphor made David stop pacing. "What do you mean by that?" "Dr. David, you have been Michael's father for 3 years. You saw his first steps, heard his first words, comforted him when he was sick, told him 1,000 stories to help him sleep. That doesn't change because you discovered who the biological father is. But it changes everything, Teresa. Everything was based on a lie. No, doctor. Everything was based on the love you feel for that boy. And that love is real, regardless of DNA." Clara watched the conversation, surprised by Teresa's wisdom in handling such a complex situation. "And what about the betrayal?" David asked. "How do you explain that?" "It's not my role to explain or judge, Dr. David. But I can say one thing. I've seen many families destroy themselves over past mistakes, and I've seen others strengthened by deciding that the future is more important than the past." David sat heavily in a chair. "Teresa, you don't understand. Every time I look at Michael now, I will remember the betrayal." "Will you really?" Teresa moved closer and sat in the chair beside him. "Or will you remember the boy who runs to your arms when he has a nightmare? The boy who asks Daddy to tell him a story every night. The boy who draws family and always includes you in the picture." Teresa's words hit David like revelations. It was true. Michael saw him as a father completely and without question. To Michael, David was not just the man married to his mother, but his father in every way that mattered. "And what if Ryan wants to meet Michael? Wants rights over him?" Clara asked. "Does Ryan know?" Teresa inquired. "No, I never told anyone about that night." "Until today? Then this is a decision for you both," Teresa said. "But before you decide anything, you need to answer one question. What is best for Michael?" The question echoed in the silence of the night. David looked at the house where Michael slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. "Do you think I should forgive Clara?" David asked directly to Teresa. "I think you should decide if you want to be a family or not. Forgiveness is a consequence, not a cause." Clara spoke up for the first time in several minutes. "David, I made a terrible mistake." I can't undo what I've done, but I can promise you that I will never again. Clara, don't make promises right now, interrupted David. I need time to process all of this. How much time? I don't know. Maybe a long time. Teresa stood up. Can I suggest something? How about Dr. David spends a few days at Mrs. Johnson's house to think clearly, away from the situation, and abandon Michael and Helena? Clara protested. Not abandon, just create space for reflection. Michael and Helena will be safe with me and with her. David considered the proposal. Maybe that's a good idea. And Clara, Teresa asked, you also need to decide some things. How will you deal with the guilt? How will you rebuild trust? How will you protect the children from all of this? Do you think we can get through this? Clara asked. I've seen couples overcome worse things, Teresa said. But it only works if both really want it, and if they put the children first. 3 days later, David was sitting in the garden of Mrs. Johnson's house, watching the plants she had cultivated for decades. His grandmother had listened to the whole story without judgment, offering only the silent affection he needed. Grandma, what would you do in my place? Mrs. Johnson continued watering her orchids. David, when your grandfather died, I found out he had a secret account he used to help his ex-wife. For 15 years of marriage, he lied to me about it. And did you forgive him? I forgave him because I understood he lied to protect me, not to hurt me. And because the love he gave me was real, regardless of the lie. But this is different, Grandma. Clara betrayed me. It is different, yes. But the question isn't whether you can forgive Clara. The question is whether you can let go of Michael. David fell silent, imagining his life without Michael. Without bedtime stories, without spontaneous hugs, without the boys' crystal-clear laughter. I can't, he admitted. I can't imagine my life without Michael. Then you already have your answer. That night, David returned home. He found Clara nursing Helena in the living room while Michael slept in her lap. Teresa had created an atmosphere of peace despite all the emotional turmoil. Hi, David said, stopping at the door of the living room. Hi, Clara replied, trying to decipher his expression. Can I hold Michael? Clara nodded, and David carefully picked up the sleeping boy in his arms. Michael murmured "Daddy" even while asleep, snuggling against David's chest. Clara, I don't know if I can forgive you yet. It might take a long time, but I know I can't let go of Michael. He is my son, no matter the DNA. And what about us? We will rebuild. Slowly, with a lot of work, with professional help if needed. But we will rebuild. Clara began to cry with relief. David, I love you. I love our family. I do too. And that's why we will make it. Teresa, who had been quietly observing everything from the kitchen, smiled and silently returned to her room. Once again, their family had found a way to stay together, and she had discovered that sometimes true love is not the one that never faces storms, but the one that learns to navigate through them without losing sight of the safe harbor. 6 months later, at Michael's 3rd birthday party, the family gathered in Teresa's garden, now officially hers, as David and Clara had given her the deed to the small space as a way to acknowledge that she was, in fact, a permanent part of their lives. Michael played with Helena, who was already crawling, and showed the same sensitivity as her brother. David had completed his thesis and secured a better job at the university. Clara had reduced her workload to dedicate more time to the family, and Teresa continued to be the heart that kept everyone united. Tessa! Michael shouted, running into her arms with a drawing in his hands. I made a family. In the drawing, made with crayons, there were 5 figures holding hands, Daddy, Mommy, Michael, Helena, and right in the center, a figure that Michael had identified as Tessa. We are all family, Michael said, showing the drawing to everyone. And looking at that simple child's drawing, Teresa finally understood that she had found what she had been searching for 20 years, not just a way to honor Jack's memory, but a new way to love and be loved, building a family that was based not only on blood, but on daily choices of care, understanding, and forgiveness. On the porch of the house, while the children played and the adults talked, the aroma of coffee mingled with the scent of the garden herbs. creating that unique atmosphere that only true homes can produce. A blend of memories, hopes, and unconditional love that makes any place a home. Please like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched until here, comment "I watched until here" and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's very emotional.